I once believed that the absurd accident of that night would finally put an end to my 10 years of mistaken love with Bo Ye. I thought it would be the conclusion to everything I had endured, everything I had given. But fate had other plans. Instead of closure, it dragged me into an even darker abyss. That night, Bo Ye's voice was filled with rage and hatred as he accused me without hesitation. He said I owed Anan a life, that he had been blind to ever marry me, and that he wanted a divorce immediately. No matter how many times I denied it, no matter how desperately I tried to explain that I hadn't pushed her, he refused to listen. He insisted he had seen it with his own eyes. In that moment, I realized that my words meant nothing compared to someone who was already dead. I was Tang Shi, the eldest daughter of the Tang family, yet none of that mattered anymore. Bo Ye coldly reminded me that Anan was his ex-girlfriend and accused me of being jealous, even though they had broken up years ago. I wanted to scream that I wasn't jealous, that I wasn't guilty, but the more I spoke, the more meaningless my voice became. Eventually, I stopped explaining. I told myself that if he believed I did it, then so be it. No explanation could ever outweigh the memory of the dead. When the word divorce was thrown at me, something inside me finally shattered. I calmly told him that if he wanted a divorce, then fine. I admitted that I, Tang Shi, had loved him for 10 whole years, and that I would treat those 10 years as nothing more than a cruel joke. But even then, he wasn't satisfied. He said we would go our separate ways, yet warned me that signing a divorce agreement was far from the end. He wanted my Tang family to be buried alongside Anan. I broke down, begging him to stop. I reminded him that my parents had treated him like their own son, that our family had never wronged him. But Bo Ye laughed bitterly and accused my family of forcing him into marriage for business Li, something he had endured for my sake. He said Anan had done nothing wrong, yet lost her life because of me. In his eyes, I was ruthless, undeserving even of his gaze. From that day on, he vowed that I would pay the price for Anan's death. The very next day, I was arrested. I was imprisoned as the prime suspect in the murder of Meng An, and the witness who testified against me was none other than Bo Ye himself.
As the police dragged me toward the patrol car, my wrists locked in cold handcuffs, I turned my head one last time. My eyes met Bo Ye's, and in that instant, filled with pity rather than hatred, I finally understood the biggest mistake of my life. Falling in love with him, Bo Ye told himself he should have felt satisfied, that justice had finally been served for Anan. Yet instead, an unbearable emptiness spread through his chest, as if a piece of his heart had been violently torn away.
Prison life was cruel. The bullying from other inmates pushed me to the brink of despair more than once. And then, during one of those darkest days, I discovered something that changed everything. I was pregnant. I was carrying Bo Ye's child. Fear consumed me as I protected my unborn baby from harm, enduring every hardship silently. After 10 agonizing months, I gave birth in prison with unimaginable difficulty. When the doctor told me it was a boy, I cried not from joy alone, but from heartbreak. After the breastfeeding period ended, I had no choice but to entrust my child to my elder brother, Tang Yi. Holding back tears, I begged him to take good care of my son and promise my baby that Mummy would come back for him very soon. 5 years passed. Because of good behavior, my sentence was reduced, and I was released early. The moment I stepped out and heard a small voice call me, Mummy, my world finally felt whole again. My son, Tang Yihan, ran into my arms, and I vowed that I would never let us be separated again. Life slowly returned to something resembling peace, yet nightmares still haunted me. One morning, my son noticed my unease and gently asked if I had dreamed badly again. He offered to tell me stories Uncle had told him, his innocent concern melting my heart. When he excitedly suggested going to the amusement park together over the weekend, I smiled and agreed, pretending everything was normal. But fate never truly lets go. One day, a news broadcast played quietly in the background, announcing that Bo family's eldest young master, Bo Ye, would soon arrive in Blue City to work with the Ye group. The name I had buried deep inside my heart resurfaced like a sharp blade. Later, my son looked up at me with innocent eyes and asked softly if that man on the news was his father. Children grow up faster than we ever expect. Sometimes they grow so fast that it makes you afraid. One day, as I watched my son sitting quietly beside me, I suddenly wondered what I would do if a child was too smart. I even joked to myself, half serious, half panicked, wondering if there was a way to make him a little dumber. I had no idea how to answer my own thoughts. How would I know? My son, however, seemed to understand far more than he should. He tilted his head and told me he had seen that man's face on the television news, then pointed at his own face, asking me to look closely. My heart tightened. To prevent Bo Yi from ever appearing in our lives again, I made a decision that very night. I told myself that this year, no matter what, I would take my son abroad. But reality quickly crushed that illusion. The Bo family's eldest young master had connections everywhere. Even if we fled overseas, he would still be able to find us. When I voiced my worries, my son laughed softly and praised me for finally realizing it. Then, in a gentle but firm voice, he told me not to worry. He said he wouldn't go with Bo Ye, even if he appeared. Confused, I asked why he was suddenly saying such things. He looked at me seriously and said he only wanted to be with Mummy. He didn't want anyone else, not even Daddy. At that moment, I looked at his face carefully. Tang Yihan's features were almost an exact copy of Bo Ye's, only smaller. Yet Bo Ye's eyes were always cold, while my son's were unbearably gentle. At such a young age, he already understood things that only adults should know, and that realization made my chest ache with distress. Later that day, we made plans to go out together. My brother offered to buy the tickets first, telling us to wait while asking what we wanted to play later. My son excitedly asked what I wanted to try. Before I could answer, the crowd shifted slightly, and somewhere not far away, a pair of eyes suddenly froze. From behind, a familiar figure stood out among the people, a woman holding a child, her movements gentle and unguarded. At first, he thought it was an illusion, a cruel trick of memory. But the more he looked, the more his heartbeat lost its rhythm. That silhouette, it felt impossible to mistake. When his gaze fell on the child in her arms, the resemblance struck him like lightning. His friend sit beside him laughed and casually remarked that the woman standing there was Bo Ye's ex-wife, and that the child in her arms looked exactly like him. They said they wouldn't believe it if the boy wasn't his son. When Bo Yi finally confronted her, his voice was filled with disbelief and restrained fury. 5 years had passed, yet he accused her of daring to secretly give birth to his child. At that moment, even he seemed unable to tell whether discovering he had a son brought him more hatred or more joy. That night, after returning home, my brother prepared to leave, reminding us to rest early. I told him not to overwork himself, but he laughed and complained that raising us was exhausting enough, and that he still hadn't even found a wife. My son cheerfully teased him, calling him the eternal bachelor, while my brother scolded him to behave and listen to Mummy. Their playful bickering filled the house with warmth I hadn't felt in years. Later, as I tucked my son in, I asked if he had fun that day. He nodded enthusiastically. Just as the house settled into silence, a sudden knock echoed through the door. My son lifted his head first, blinking sleepily, and muttered to himself that Uncle must have forgotten something. Before I could stop him, his small footsteps padded toward the door. The door opened. A tall figure stood outside, his presence heavy and unfamiliar. In a calm, low voice that sliced through the quiet night, he looked down at the child and spoke words I hadn't heard in 5 years. He called him a brat and then said he was his father, Bo Ye. Panic flooded my mind. How did he know our address? Had he come to take my child away? He greeted me as if no time had passed, saying it was nice to see me again.
My son stand between him and me.
Making it clear that we had lived quietly all these years and done nothing wrong. I asked him to say whatever he had to say and leave. My son tugged at my sleeve, telling me not to be afraid and suggesting we go to sleep. But Bo Ye stopped us. He demanded an explanation about the child. I asked him what there was to explain. I reminded him that I had already spent 5 years in prison and begged him to let me go. As a woman with a criminal record, was I even worthy of stepping into his grand world? He angrily said. My thoughts, however, were not for me to judge. When he asked when the child was born, I answered calmly that it was, of course, during my time in prison. I laughed bitterly, asking how someone like me could ever catch his attention, or why he would care whether I was pregnant at all. In his eyes, there had always been only Anan. At the mention of her name, his expression darkened instantly, and he ordered me to stop. I struggled as he grabbed me, confusion and fear mixing together. When he saw the injuries on my body, and asked, why are there so many injuries on my body? I asked if this wasn't the very gift he had personally given me. I told him that I had already suffered enough in this life because of him. I begged him, sincerely, to show mercy and let me go. As he looked into my eyes, one question echoed endlessly in his mind. In my heart, was there truly nothing left for him but hatred? In the end, I turned away and asked him to leave. Some wounds, no matter how much time passes, never truly heal.
I once thought that sending her to prison would make her regret everything for the rest of her life. I thought that was the punishment she deserved. But standing there now, looking at Tang Shi, a question I couldn't escape slowly surfaced in my mind. Who had abused her during those years in prison? Who had stripped away her pride, piece by piece, until nothing seemed left? As Boye watched her, an unfamiliar fear quietly rose in his chest. He suddenly realized that he could no longer understand the woman standing before him. They had been married for 5 years, yet now she felt like a complete stranger. When she finally spoke, her voice was calm and distant, asking him to leave. It hurt more than any accusation ever could. What exactly had happened to her in those 5 years? This was clearly the outcome he had wanted to see, yet for some reason it didn't bring him satisfaction. Instead, unease crept in. Beneath Tang Shi's composed exterior, all those restless emotions seemed to surge forward at once, as if the dark, lightless days of the past were clawing at her, trying to drag her back in. Later that night, as my son handed me a glass of milk and softly asked if I wanted some, I smiled and nodded, pretending everything was fine. After that chaotic night, I truly believed I would never be entangled with Boye again. But fate has never been kind to me. The very next afternoon, something completely unexpected happened. My brother called in a panic, telling me that the kindergarten principal said someone had forcibly taken Yihan away. When he checked the surveillance footage, the person was Boye. I steadied my voice and told my brother not to worry, that I would handle it, reassuring him even as my hands trembled. In my heart, however, something snapped. Boye had taken away my last bit of faith. From that moment on, I knew I would risk everything to fight him. That night, at the Bo family mansion, my son stood his ground. When Boye's mother questioned him about his parents, the child calmly replied that who his mother was didn't matter to her, and who his father was naturally didn't matter to him either. Startled by his answer, she pressed on, asking how his mother was doing. My son answered in a tone that was innocent, yet painfully sharp, saying that in prison everyone eats state rice. So his mom lived without worrying about food or clothing. Boye frowned, asking who had taught him to speak with such thorns, whether it was Tang Shi. My son didn't back down. He said everyone around him talked that way, and even Boye himself had mentioned it in front of his mother just the day before. When accused of coming here to cause trouble, the child simply said that if Boye didn't like it, he could send him back. He made it clear that using him to threaten his mother would only make them hate Boye even more. That was when Boye finally realized it. Tang Shi really did hate him, and even her son had been taught to hate him too. This wasn't how things were supposed to turn out. Frustration took over and he smashed the wall, but Yihan only called it childish behavior. Eventually, Boye went upstairs, telling his mother to take care of the child. Later, his grandmother gently asked my son if he had been scared, then asked his name, and he answered proudly that his name was Tang Yihan, explaining that the character Yi had a heart radical and meant only and hope, just as his mother had told him. When praised, he replied coldly that even flattery wouldn't make him get close to them. All he wanted was his mom. He said she would definitely come to find him. She realizes that he really hates them. In the morning, I arrived at Bo Ye's office. When I arrived, people whispered behind my back. Some wondered who I was looking for. When I said Bo Ye's name, they told me I needed an appointment. Others speculated in hushed voices, saying I must have powerful backing, maybe even that I was Bo Ye's secret lover. They laughed, wondering how that could be when everyone knew his heart had always belonged to Anan. Hearing that, I finally understood how foolish I had been back then, believing that marriage alone could make him love me. I told them to give Bo Ye my name. I'm confident that he would see me immediately. Along the way, I ran into Tang Shi, one of Bo Ye's friends. He casually offered to take me upstairs, saying there was no need to thank him. After all, the Tang family owned shares in the company once. I thanked him in return, then quietly remarked that he had once investigated me thoroughly, but in the end, I had never been his. He hesitated before asking if it was really Bo Ye who had sent me to prison 5 years ago. By the time I stepped into the office, he could feel it clearly. Tang Shi was no longer the naive girl she once was. When Bo Ye saw me, his first question was why I was there. I answered plainly that I had come to take back my son. He said the child was his too. I looked him straight in the eye and told him no, the child was mine alone. I questioned him calmly, asking whether he truly intended to acknowledge this child now. After all, wasn't he the same man who had once hated me to death? The room fell silent, and in that silence, everything that had been buried for 5 years began to resurface. Bo Ye stood in front of me, close enough that I could see his expression clearly, yet I felt as though we were standing on opposite sides of an abyss. At some point during those years in prison, I finally understood something cruel. Whether I had been innocent back then no longer mattered in the slightest. Truth had lost all meaning. What truly mattered was this. From beginning to end, he had never trusted me. Not even once. I told him calmly not to pretend now, not to suddenly act as if lingering feelings still existed between us. The moment those words left my mouth, his voice turned sharp, demanding to know who had taught me to speak like that. I looked at him and answered without hesitation. It was him. He was the one who personally taught me how to speak like this. He was the one who crushed every trace of love I once had, grinding it into dust. After destroying my heart, devouring the Tang family, and leaving my life in ruins, what more could he possibly want from me? I told him I had nothing left. Nothing at all. All I wanted was my son. I begged him, quietly, desperately, to let me go and give my child back to me. He agreed. But his condition was worse than rejection. That night, he ordered me to go to Manga and accompany one of his clients for drinks. For a brief moment, the world seemed to tilt. I asked him if he truly meant to humiliate me like this, to trade my dignity for my own flesh and blood. His reply was cold and merciless. If I wanted my child, I would do it. If I couldn't even manage that much, then I didn't deserve to ask. He assumed I would retreat. He were wrong. I agreed. If one round of drinking could bring my son back, I would risk my life without hesitation. My life had already been torn apart, piece by piece. Shattering what remained meant nothing to me anymore. Even Bo Ye looked irritated, unsettled. Perhaps he hadn't expected me to submit so easily. Or perhaps he hadn't expected me to still have the strength to stand. That same night, at the Bo family residence, my son waited outside quietly for me. When Bo Ye came and told him that from now on he would raise him, that he would even change his surname, my son didn't cry, didn't resist. He only asked one question. Had the legal process been completed? If Bo Ye wanted to raise him, then he would have to fight his mother in court. Bo Ye scoffed, claiming he was the child's biological father and needed no permission. But my son corrected him calmly, reminding him that he was born after the divorce, and by law, custody belonged to his mother. Even Bo Ye was stunned, a 5-year-old, already this clear-headed. Then my son asked something even crueler. If he weren't his son, If he had been born to his mother and another man, would Bo Ye still treat him the same? Bo Ye answered instantly, rage flickering beneath his calm. Any man who dared touch her would be courting death. But my son shook his head slowly. He told him that Bo Ye would never understand what their last 5 years had been like, and because of that, he could never be close to him. "I'm waiting for my mom," my son said softly. "Please do as you wish." Even Bo Ye had to admit it. This mother and son were not easy to deal with.
When I was waiting to meet him at that night,
The words I had buried for half a lifetime spilled out. From my youth until now, I had loved him for 15 years. I had endured suffering that felt like an entire lifetime for that love. But now I finally understood. We were impossible, and the price of learning that truth was utter ruin and the complete destruction of my family. As I walked away, only one question echoed relentlessly in my mind. How did we end up like this? And more importantly, who had been pulling the strings from the shadows all along? Later that night at Manga, the lights were harsh and the music deafening. A stranger approached me with a lazy smile, asking if I was alone and wanted to have some fun. I told him I had an appointment. He laughed, grabbed my wrist, and said I could have that appointment with him first. Suddenly, Bo Ye arrived at the scene, and free my hand from the stranger told him to, enraged, "Get lost." "How long have you been waiting?" Bo Ye's voice was calm, almost indifferent. "Not long," I replied. "About 10 minutes." I stood there with my back straight, my elegance intact, and yet that very composure made him uneasy. He could feel it. The woman before him felt unfamiliar. Once I had been gentle and generous, my eyes full of affection. Now those same eyes were empty, like a decayed black hole. The pride I once carried had long since had its wings broken, dragged down, swallowed whole, and reduced to nothing. "Let's go upstairs," he said. I followed him. When we reached the room, I didn't wait to be invited in. Thinking it's too late to regret, I forcefully pushed the door open and stepped inside. The noise rushed out instantly. Laughter, alcohol, careless voices. Someone whistled loudly. "This chick's hot." "Who brought her in?" Fujian's gaze locked onto me, openly satisfied. He laughed and leaned back. "Old Ye, you brought her, right? She's exactly my type. How did you know I like this kind?" Bo Ye's eyes darkened. "So?" he asked coldly. "You want her?" His friend tried to smooth things over, asking if they should step in and talk to Fujian. Bo Ye waved it off without even looking away. "No need," he said. "I want to see how long she can last." Fujian turned to me with a grin. "Pretty lady, want to play a game?" At that moment, I understood everything. I wasn't here to talk business. I was here to be tested, to be worn down until I admitted defeat. But I didn't retreat. If Bo Ye brought me here to entertain the client, then all I had to do was keep Fujian company. I apologized for being late and poured myself a drink, punishing myself first. I smiled lightly and said that, if we played games later, I hoped they wouldn't target me. Fujian laughed, clearly pleased. He called me cute. I smiled back and returned the compliment. That was when Bo Ye realized something had gone wrong. He hadn't expected me to endure. He hadn't expected me to stay. But he said nothing. As long as I could help him deal with Fujian, what did it matter if I drank with him? Even if I sat beside him? Even if I smiled at him? Then someone shouted that I had lost the game. Pretty lady lost. "Fujian, hurry and give her a kiss." Fujian froze. Before anyone could react, Bo Ye suddenly stood up. His chair scraped harshly against the floor, his voice slicing through the room like a blade. "What are you playing?" Fujian was startled, genuinely scared. "Oh, old Ye, why are you shouting so suddenly? You scared me." No one laughed. No one dared move. Rage surged uncontrollably from deep inside Bo Ye, so sudden and violent that even he didn't understand it. He didn't stop to think why. In that second, his mind was filled with wild, dangerous thoughts. Take her home, lock her up, never let another man touch her. She was his. She had always been his. Anyone who touched her deserved to die. Truth or dare, I asked Bo Ye, want to join? Thinking, what's he doing now? Isn't he just trying to make me look bad? Bo angrily replayed, no need. Fujian tried to change the subject, forcing a laugh as he looked at me. By the way, pretty lady, You haven't told me your name yet. My name? I hesitated. What name should I give? Tang Shi, the Tang family's eldest daughter from 5 years ago? Or the woman reduced to drinking and smiling just to please men? Fujian tilted his head, pretending to joke. What's wrong? You're not some scary person, right? Don't scare me. The room felt suffocating. The lights were too bright. My head began to spin. I feel a little dizzy, I said quietly. I'll go to the bathroom. I'll tell you when I get back. I'll be waiting, pretty lady. Fujian called after me. As I walked away, a bitter thought crushed my chest. How ridiculous. All the pride I pretended to still possess, all the strength I wore like armor, the moment I spoke my name, it would all turn into a joke. Just then, Boye followed me inside. His gaze was sharp, unreadable. What's wrong? He asked. Why won't you tell him who you are? And in that moment, standing under harsh lights with nowhere left to hide, I finally understood this wasn't humiliation anymore. This was control.